Isaac had been a priest for many years. Service became his life, his meaning and his solace. The temple was a place where he felt needed, fulfilling an important mission to help people find spiritual solace, strength and meaning. Every day he held a service, listened to confessions, gave advice and spent hours in prayer, asking God for wisdom and strength to fulfill his destiny. There were always a lot of parishioners in his church, but one woman stood out especially from the rest. She always sat in the same place on the second pew, closer to the altar. Isaac noticed her devotion, her constant prayers, her deep immersion in spiritual life. Her name was Alice, and she came to the temple so often that her face became familiar to him. However, at some point he realized that he began to notice her more than the others. Alice has never sought to attract attention to herself. She came to the temple for prayer, in order to find peace. But Isaac couldn't ignore her presence. Her quiet devotion, her modesty began to arouse his interest. He began to notice how her face shone with calmness during the service, how her hands lay calmly on her lap when she prayed. This image became for him a symbol of true faith and inner strength. One day after the service, Isaac saw that Alice lingered in the temple when everyone had already left. She was sitting in her usual place with her head bowed in prayer. He wanted to get to know her better, to understand what attracted her to the temple, what made her come so often. He approached her cautiously, not wanting to break her moment of silence.
Alice.
Her eyes, full of calm, lifted to him. She smiled warmly at him, although her face remained calm and focused.
Yes, Father Isaac.
His heart skipped a beat when she said his name. He had never thought before that her voice could evoke such feelings in him: warmth, care and interest at the same time.
I noticed that you often come to the temple. It is always good when parishioners are so devoted to the faith. What brings you here so often?
Alice thought for a moment, as if she hadn't expected such a question, and then answered softly.
The temple is the only place where I feel real peace. Here I can find solace and feel closer to God.
Her words touched his heart. He had often heard from people about how they came to the temple for comfort, but there was something special in her voice, something deeper than ordinary words of gratitude. From that moment on, their casual conversations became part of their interaction. Every time after the service, when the temple began to empty, Isaac approached Alice. They talked about faith, about life, about what worries their souls. Alice turned out to be a woman with deep inner peace, wisdom and quiet strength. She shared with Isaac her thoughts about faith, about how religion helps her cope with life's difficulties. Isaac noticed that every time he talked to Alice, he felt something special. Her words touched him to the depths of his soul, and he found in their conversations not only a source for spiritual reflection, but also something more personal. She was not just a parishioner for him, she became the person with whom he could share his thoughts about life, about meaning, about faith. With each conversation, their bond grew stronger. They discussed not only spiritual issues, but also life in general. Alice talked about her life, how she feels lonely and finds solace in the temple. Isaac listened to her attentively, feeling that her words were resonating in his heart. He realized that he was beginning to see her not only as a parishioner, but also as a woman whose soul was close to him. One day, after another service when everyone had already left, Isaac approached Alice again, but this time he felt that the conversation would be different. He couldn't tell exactly what had changed, but there was a feeling inside him that something important was about to happen.
Alice, you have been coming here for many years, and during this time I have felt that your faith and your path to God are extraordinarily deep. You are often silent, but your presence is always felt in the temple. Why did you choose this particular temple for your prayers?
She looked at him with a slight smile, her eyes full of tenderness and warmth.
When I first came here, I felt very heavy at heart. I found peace in this temple. Your service and words have helped me to cope with my internal conflicts. Since then, I have always felt that this is my place.
Isaac listened to her in silence, feeling a feeling growing inside him that he had been trying not to realize for a long time. Her words touched him, and he realized that their connection had become something more than just the interaction of a priest and a parishioner. Alice, as if reading his mind, added,
I often think about how important the words of a priest are for the soul. Your words always resonate in my heart. It's not just sermons, it's more than that. It seems to me that through them I found the strength to live on.
Her confession caused him a mixture of joy and embarrassment. Isaac suddenly realized that these feelings that he felt for her could no longer remain within the framework of simple spiritual communication. Their conversations became something personal, something that filled his life with new meaning. After that evening, their communication became even more open. They talked about their fears, doubts, and hopes. Alice talked about her loneliness, and Isaac shared his doubts about his path. Every time they were together, their souls became closer to each other. They understood that there was more between them than just a spiritual connection. For Isaac, it was both frightening and inspiring. He was a priest. His duty was to serve God and people, but his heart began to beat differently when he was with Alice. He felt that he was starting to fall in love with her, and this was a challenge for him. There was no place for personal attachments in his life, but his soul could not ignore what was happening. Alice also began to realize that her feelings for Isaac went beyond the usual devotion to a spiritual mentor. She felt that there was a special bond between them that she couldn't explain. Every time she looked at him, her heart skipped a beat, and she realized that her attraction to him was getting stronger every day. They both knew that they were on the verge of something that could change their lives. Isaac, despite all his beliefs and responsibilities, began to wonder if he could afford to love Alice. His mind was fighting with his heart, but every time he saw her, he felt that he could not remain indifferent. Their spiritual connection grew into something more. Isaac and Alice were no longer just a priest and a parishioner, they were two souls who had found each other in a world full of loneliness and fear. After their first conversations in the temple, Isaac and Alice began to meet more often. At first, these were short conversations after the service, but over time their meetings became more and more lengthy. Alice came to the temple not only for services, but also during the week she was drawn to this place, not only by the desire to pray, but also to meet Isaac. She felt that in his presence her soul found peace and understanding. For Isaac, in turn, these meetings became an important part of the day. He was always surrounded by people who needed his advice and support. But Alice became a special companion for him. Her listening skills, her deep faith and sincere interest in spiritual matters made her communication with him unique. With each conversation, Isaac felt that she was not just looking for a priest in him, but also a friend who could understand her inner world. One evening, after a long service, when all the parishioners had already left, Isaac noticed that Alice had stayed. She was sitting on her usual bench, but her gaze was focused not on the altar, but on the emptiness in front of her. At that moment, he realized that something was bothering her. He went up to her to find out what had happened.
Alice, I noticed that you were late. Is something bothering you?
She looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt and a slight sadness. Her face, usually calm and peaceful, seemed especially thoughtful this evening.
Yes, Father Isaac. I have a lot of thoughts that haunt me. Sometimes I feel like I'm not coping with what's going on in my life.
Isaac sat down next to her on the bench, listening attentively to her. He had noticed long ago that Alice often hid her true feelings behind a mask of calm, and knew that her life was not easy.
You can always tell me about your experiences, Alice. Sometimes we can't find the answers ourselves, but prayer and conversation can give us clarity.
Alice hesitated before continuing.
I feel lonely even being around people. My faith helps me deal with it. But sometimes I feel like it's not enough.
Isaac understood her like no one else. He often felt lonely himself, despite being surrounded by parishioners, friends and colleagues. His mission was to support others, but who supported him?
Loneliness is something that can affect each of us, even when we are surrounded by people. Faith helps us overcome this, but sometimes we need something more, a loved one who can share our thoughts and fears with us.
These words sounded unexpectedly sincere to him. He hadn't expected to say such a thing, but deep down he knew it was true. He himself missed someone who could share his inner feelings, and at that moment he realized that Alice had become the person he was drawn to. Alice nodded, her eyes full of gratitude that he understood her.
I'm glad I can talk to you about this. Every time I come here, I feel like I'm finding peace, but I also feel like I miss communicating with someone who can understand me.
This conversation was the beginning of their more open conversations. Now they were not limited to spiritual matters. Their conversations touched on personal topics that they had previously avoided. Alice told Isaac about her past, about the difficulties she had to face, about her fears and dreams. He, in turn, shared with her his thoughts and experiences, which he rarely discussed with anyone. Their bond was getting stronger. Isaac began to notice that each of their interactions caused him inner excitement, and this worried him. He understood that he was attracted to Alice not only as a parishioner, but also as a woman. It was a new and unexpected feeling for him, which he did not know how to deal with. Every time he thought of Alice, his mind reminded him of his priestly duties, that his calling required self-denial. But his heart could not ignore the emotions that arose in him. Alice also began to realize that her feelings for Isaac were changing. She could no longer see him as just a priest or a friend. Her heart started beating faster every time she met him, and she could no longer deny that she was falling in love with him. However, like Isaac, she was afraid to admit it. Their situation was too complicated, and she didn't want to embarrass him. One day, when they were alone again after the service, Isaac decided to ask a question that had been tormenting him for a long time.
Alice, you are always so close to God. Your faith is strong. But tell me, what gives you the strength to carry on every day when you feel lonely?
Her response was unexpected.
You, Father Isaac. Your words, your support, all this helps me cope. Every time I come here, I find comfort in you.
These words startled him. He had not expected such a confession and felt something change inside him. He knew that their connection went beyond spiritual support, and it scared him.
Alice, I do not know how to say this, but I feel that our conversations have become something special for me too. But I'm afraid we might go too far.
Alice stared at him intently, her face expressing a mixture of tenderness and fear.
I know what you're talking about. I feel it too, but I'm afraid that our feelings could lead to both of us losing what's important to us.
This moment was a turning point. Both were aware that their attraction to each other was getting stronger every day. Isaac struggled with inner doubts, realizing that his duty as a priest did not allow him to succumb to these feelings. But at the same time, he could not deny that Alice had become for him the one he had been looking for a long time, a person who understands him on a deep level. Their meetings continued, but now they knew that they were on the verge of something more than just friendship. Isaac often prayed to find answers to his questions, but his heart was increasingly inclined to believe that their feelings were not accidental. Alice also tried to find answers in prayers, but every time they were together, she realized that she couldn't ignore her feelings. The bond between them grew stronger and stronger, and every day brought them closer to the moment when they would have to make a decision to stay true to their beliefs or let their feelings develop further. Over time, Isaac and Alice's feelings became impossible to deny. Despite their attempts to maintain formality and restraint, each new communication only increased their mutual attraction. Each conversation became more personal and heartfelt, and they both realized that their relationship went beyond friendship. It was only a matter of time before this realization caught up with them. One day after the service, when all the parishioners had left, Isaac was alone with Alice again. Everything seemed different that day. The air was tense, as if it was expecting something important, something inevitable. Alice was sitting on her usual bench, her gaze fixed on the altar, but it seemed that her thoughts were far away from here. Isaac, feeling the same tension, approached her cautiously.
Alice, you look thoughtful. Has something happened?
She looked at him, her eyes full of contradictions and doubts.
Isaac, I can't pretend anymore. It seems to me that our feelings can no longer remain hidden. I don't know how to say it any other way.
Isaac sighed. Her words accurately reflected what was going on in his soul. He couldn't ignore what was going on between them anymore either. He was a priest. His duty was to serve God and people. But his heart began to beat differently when he was with Alice. He struggled with these feelings, but now he realized that it was no longer just friendship or spiritual support.
Alice, I feel it too. but I can't afford to give in to these feelings. I have made a vow to serve God and my flock, and if I break it..."
He paused, trying to find the right words, but at that moment, Alice took a step towards him. She got up from the bench, approached him, and gently touched his hand.
"I know, Isaac. I know how difficult it is for you, but we can no longer deny what we feel. I understand that this goes against everything you've taught and believed, but my feelings for you are real."
Isaac closed his eyes, feeling two forces fighting in his soul: duty and love. He opened his eyes and looked at Alice. There was so much warmth and understanding in her eyes that he couldn't push her away anymore.
"I can't deny it. Every time I see you, my heart fills with warmth, and I can't explain it. It's more than friendship. It's love, Alice."
Her eyes lit up at those words. She didn't need anything else. She felt the same way, but she was afraid to admit it, afraid to ruin his life. But now that Isaac had said it out loud himself, her fears had receded. And at that moment, without words, they got closer. It was inevitable. They both understood that their love went beyond all boundaries, but it was more than they could control. Their kiss was quiet, careful, but filled with the emotions that were accumulating in their hearts. This moment was the beginning of something that both of them were afraid to admit, but could no longer deny. After that evening, they began to meet in secret. Isaac understood that his position as a priest made their relationship impossible in the eyes of the church and parishioners, but his heart could no longer ignore his love for Alice. He continued to lead the services, remaining the same devoted priest on the outside, but inside his soul was torn between his duty to God and the love he felt for Alice. Each of their meetings was filled with tenderness and fear. They knew that they could not openly show their feelings, but every touch, every word was filled with passion that they had held back for too long. Meeting in secluded places where no one could see them, they shared with each other their thoughts, fears and dreams about the future. Isaac felt torn. He knew he was breaking his vows, but at the same time he knew he couldn't live without Alice. She became the meaning for him that he had been searching for all his life. He prayed for forgiveness, but his prayers did not bring relief, because he knew that he could not give up this love. His mind said one thing, but his heart said another. Alice, in turn, was also experiencing an internal conflict. She understood that their relationship put Isaac in a difficult position, and sometimes she felt guilty for dragging him into it. But she also knew that her love for him was sincere, and she couldn't give up on that feeling. They both understood that their relationship was complicated and dangerous, but their attraction to each other was too strong. Their bond grew stronger every day. They found solace in communicating with each other, discussing not only their love, but also life in general. Isaac shared with Alice his thoughts about God, about ministry, and how difficult it was for him to combine his role as a priest with the love he felt for her. Alice supported him, realizing how difficult it was for him to make such decisions. One day, when they met again in a secluded place outside the temple, Isaac could not contain his emotions.
"Alice, I do not know how much longer I can take this. My heart is breaking apart. I love you, but every time I stand in front of the altar, I feel like I'm betraying everything I believed in."
Alice took his hand and looked at him with sadness and understanding.
"Isaac, I don't want you to suffer, but I can't hide my feelings anymore either. I know our relationship is complicated, but it's real, and I believe that love cannot be a sin."
His heart fluttered. Her words were simple, but they carried the truth that he had been searching for a long time. He understood that their love was something sacred, even if it went against his duties. But how can he accept this when all his upbringing and ministry have taught him the opposite? Every day Isaac became more and more immersed in his thoughts. He continued to lead the services, but his sermons were now filled with questions about love, faith and devotion. The parishioners began to notice changes in his behavior. He became more thoughtful, and his views on some aspects of religion began to change. But no one knew the true reason for his inner struggle. Each of their meetings became for Isaac's salvation and punishment at the same time. He found comfort and love in Alice, but every time they said goodbye, he was tormented by doubts. How long can they hide their feelings? How long will he be able to lead a double life? Despite all these doubts, their love only grew stronger. Isaac could no longer imagine his life without Alice. She became for him the light that illuminated his path in moments of darkness. And although he knew that their path would be difficult, he was ready to go to the end. Their secret romance continued, and every day they found something new in their relationship, which only made their love stronger. But the clouds were gathering over them, and they both knew that sooner or later they would have to make a choice. The choice is between duty and love, between vows and the heart. Isaac had long known that his feelings for Alice went beyond friendship and spiritual support. The love he began to feel for her grew stronger and stronger, and it destroyed his inner world. As a priest, he devoted his life to serving God and people, renouncing earthly attachments and personal desires, and now it all seemed empty and useless to him in the face of the love he felt for Alice. Every day became more and more painful for Isaac. He couldn't deny that his feelings for Alice were sincere and deep, but at the same time, his faith and vows weighed on him with irresistible force. The priestly life demanded from him purity of thought, devotion to God and renunciation of earthly pleasures. But with each meeting with Alice, Isaac felt his inner principles being destroyed, and he could not stop this process. Every morning when Isaac went up to the pulpit to preach, his voice trembled. He talked about the importance of faith, self-denial and spiritual service, but inside he was torn by contradictions. He tried to pray, asked God to give him the strength to overcome his feelings, but his heart did not obey his mind. The prayers that had previously brought him comfort now seemed empty. He couldn't find an answer that could ease his suffering. Isaac tried to find solace in solitude. He locked himself in his cell, prayed for hours, read sacred texts, but all this did not bring him peace. He began to wonder why God had sent him such feelings. After all, the love he felt for Alice was pure and sincere, but at the same time it went against his priestly vows. This conflict plagued him day after day. The moral principles that Isaac had preached all his life now seemed like a heavy burden to him. He always believed that the love of God and the love of man should be different, but his feelings for Alice were mixed with his spiritual faith. He could no longer separate the two worlds. Every time he saw Alice, his heart was filled with warmth, and this moment seemed to him a true grace. But then he was overwhelmed with guilt and shame for betraying his priestly vows. Alice, in turn, also had deep doubts. She understood that their relationship was contrary to religious norms, and this did not give her peace of mind. Her love for Isaac was strong and sincere, but she was afraid that she would destroy his life and his spiritual ministry. Alice often wondered if she was doing the right thing by falling in love with a priest who dedicated his life to God. Her faith had always been an important part of her life, and now she felt she was on the verge of betrayal. However, Alice couldn't deny her feelings. Every time she met Isaac, her heart was filled with joy, and she realized that she could not give up this love. She sincerely believed that their feelings could not be evil, because they came from a pure heart. But her inner doubts tore her apart anyway. Alice could not find peace in her prayers. Her thoughts constantly returned to Isaac, and to the fact that their relationship violated all religious prohibitions. One day Isaac decided to talk to God openly and without fear. He locked himself in his office, lit a candle and knelt down in front of the altar. At this moment he felt like his soul was torn in two. One part of him screamed about devotion to God, about the need to remain faithful to his vows, and the other part asked to be allowed to love and be loved. He prayed for forgiveness, for finding an answer that would help him deal with this conflict. Isaac asked God to guide him, to give him clarity in this difficult situation. He spoke aloud, as if hoping that the sky would open, give him a sign. But the silence that surrounded him did not bring an answer. Instead, his heart was filled with the image of Alice again, her smile, her soft words, her eyes full of love. Isaac understood that his love for her could no longer be just an emotion that could be suppressed. It was something deeper, something that had become a part of his soul. After this prayer, Isaac realized that his inner conflict would not be resolved so easily. He could no longer ignore his love for Alice, but he also could not turn away from the God he had served all his life. Every day was a challenge for him. He continued to lead the services, but his heart was far away. He could no longer sincerely talk about self-denial, about devotion to God's commandments, when he himself felt that he was violating them. Alice also tried to find answers in her prayers. She was looking for peace and understanding, but every time her thoughts returned to Isaac, she felt guilty for dragging him into this relationship, but at the same time she knew she couldn't live without him. She knew that their love broke all the rules, but how could she ignore what she felt? How could one give up true love just because it did not fit into the framework of religious dogmas? For Alice, this conflict has become not only religious, but also moral. She was afraid that she was destroying Isaac's life, that her love would lead him to a spiritual catastrophe. But every time they were together, she saw that Isaac was suffering just as much as she was. They were both prisoners of their feelings, and they both knew they couldn't go back. Their love had become too strong to be denied or suppressed. This internal conflict made Isaac and Alice suffer every day. Their meetings were no longer accompanied by the ease they had experienced in the beginning. Now every moment spent together was riddled with tension and fear of the future. They understood that their relationship could destroy not only their lives, but also the spiritual foundations on which they built their faith. Isaac tried to find a solution through conversations with other priests, but could not open up to them completely. He asked questions about love and duty, about how to combine service to God with human feelings, but the answers he received did not give him relief. Everyone said the same thing: love for man should not prevail over love for God, and Isaac knew this. But what about when this love for a person has become part of his spiritual path? What to do when he feels that his love for Alice goes hand in hand with his faith? Alice couldn't find an answer to her questions either. She understood that their relationship went against her religious beliefs, but she could not give up her feelings. Every time she came to the temple, her heart stopped at the sight of Isaac, and she knew that she could not live without him. Her love for him became so strong that she could not imagine her life without his presence. When Alice found out she was pregnant, her world completely turned upside down. It was something unexpected, but at the same time, deep down, she knew that this day could come. Her love for Isaac had long ceased to be a secret only for the two of them. They both knew that sooner or later the consequences of their relationship would become obvious. However, the realization that she was carrying a child under her heart led her into a state of shock and confusion. At first, Alice didn't know how to tell Isaac about it. She knew that this news would put him in front of a choice that he had been afraid and avoiding all this time. Their relationship was already complicated, but pregnancy added a new level of complexity. She was afraid not only of Isaac's reaction, but also of how it would change their lives. Her heart was filled with fear and joy at the same time, fear of the inevitable consequences and joy that their love would now be embodied in a new person. Alice began to avoid Isaac in order to make sense of everything that was happening. She visited the temple less often, and her prayers became more intense and uncertain. But one day it became clear to her that she could no longer hide the truth. She had to tell him everything. One evening, when the temple was empty and they were alone, Alice finally found the strength to confess. For Isaac, this news was a blow. He had long understood that his love with Alice could not remain a secret forever, but pregnancy changed everything. He was a priest, a man who had taken a vow of purity and service to God, and this news put him in front of a choice that he had been afraid of all his life. He felt his heart fill with fear, guilt, and doubt. How could he remain a priest, knowing that he had broken one of the most important vows? How could he continue to preach faith and fidelity when he found himself in such a difficult position? Isaac felt his world crumbling. His love for Alice was sincere, but now he realized that this love had led them to unpredictable consequences. He knew he couldn't hide his secret anymore. Soon everyone will find out about their relationship, and this will mean the end of his priestly career. But what was more important to him, his vocation or his love for Alice and their unborn child? No matter how hard he tried to find an answer through prayer and reflection, Isaac understood that the situation required decisive action. The time to hide the truth was running out. When Alice's belly starts to grow, her pregnancy will become obvious to everyone, and the secret of their relationship will be revealed. He was afraid of how the parishioners, other priests and clergy would react to this. He knew that his action would be perceived as a betrayal by those who trusted him with their soul. Alice also felt the weight of what was happening. Her joy at the prospect of motherhood was mixed with guilt that their relationship had ruined Isaac's life as a priest. She knew that their affair could no longer remain in the shadows, and she was afraid that she would be condemned, especially in the religious community. But at the same time, she couldn't help but feel a deep affection for Isaac and their unborn child. She dreamed that they could be together as a family, but she understood that this was impossible without serious sacrifices. When Alice's pregnancy became noticeable, rumors began to spread. Parishioners began to notice her changes and ask questions. In a small community where people knew each other, such things could not be hidden for long. At first there were only whispers and suspicions, but soon the rumors reached other priests and even the highest clergy. Questions about who the father of the child was began to pile up, and every day became more and more stressful for Isaac and Alice. Finally, one day, the priests and spiritual mentors called Isaac for a conversation. He had to face direct questions and accusations. He tried to explain his feelings, tried to find words to express his inner struggle between duty and love. But for his colleagues, this was an unacceptable violation of their vows, and their reaction was predictable disappointment, condemnation, and a demand to immediately end this relationship. Isaac's whole life collapsed. He understood that he could no longer serve as a priest. His love for Alice was too strong, and he couldn't give up on her or their unborn child. However, the realization that he had betrayed his flock and his faith haunted him. He felt torn between two worlds, and at that moment he realized that his choice could no longer be postponed. Alice, seeing his suffering, offered to leave, to start a new life away from the city, away from people who knew them and condemned them. But Isaac couldn't just leave without an explanation. He felt he had to take responsibility for his actions and explain to the parishioners what had happened. A real struggle broke out inside him to give up his vocation for love or to continue serving, knowing that he had broken his vows. In the end, Isaac made a decision. He went out in front of his flock and confessed everything. He talked about his love for Alice, that she was pregnant, and that they decided to be together. He knew that this would lead to condemnation and disappointment from those who supported him, but he could no longer live in lies and secrecy. His words shocked the parishioners, many of whom could not believe that their priest, who had always been an example to them, had broken his vows. The reaction to Isaac's confession was expected. Many parishioners left the church, not wanting to deal with him anymore. Some priests turned away from him, considering him a traitor. But there were also those who, despite everything, understood him. These people saw in his act not only a violation of vows, but also human weakness, love, and the struggle for their happiness. They stayed with him, supporting him through this difficult period. Isaac, who lost his priestly vocation, began a new life with Alice. Their love and the birth of a child became a new meaning of life for him. Although he could no longer serve in the temple, his faith did not fade. He continued to search for spiritual answers to his questions, trying to reconcile his love for God and for Alice. There was still faith in his heart, but now it was intertwined with human feelings and experiences. Alice and Isaac faced many difficulties along the way. They had to start from scratch, but they both knew that their love was more than just a passing infatuation. The birth of a child became a new hope for them and a symbol of their love, which, despite all obstacles, continued to live. Although their story was full of suffering and loss, they found the strength to accept their love for what it was and move forward together. After Isaac made the decision to leave the priesthood, his life changed dramatically. Giving up the priesthood, which was an integral part of his life, was a difficult step, but he knew that this was the only way to support Alice and their unborn child. His resignation caused a wave of condemnation from the church and the community, but for Isaac it was clear that love for Alice and responsibility for the family were more important. The first days after his departure were filled with a sense of loss. Isaac felt disconnected from his usual life, deprived of the meaning he found in service. The temple where he spent years was his home, a place where he helped others, guided people on the path of faith. But now his own faith has been put to the test. He wondered if he had done the right thing, but every time he saw Alice and felt her love, the doubts subsided a little. Alice also experienced this time as a period of change. The realization that Isaac had left the priesthood for her brought her both joy and guilt. She knew that their love was sincere and mutual, but she understood that Isaac sacrificed everything to be with her. Her support was important to him in these moments, and she tried to be a support, despite her own fears and insecurities. They both had to face a new reality. Without a spiritual community and stable job, Isaac was looking for a way to secure a future for his new family. He began to look for a new vocation that would allow him to continue helping people, but outside the framework of the church. Gradually, Isaac realized that his desire to serve and support people had not disappeared. He could still use his experience to guide others, but now it was outside the church walls. Alice, being in the late stages of pregnancy, also faced a difficult choice. Her life has changed as dramatically as Isaac's. She could no longer come to the temple as often as before, because now her relationship with Isaac was known to everyone. And this made her the object of condemnation from the community. But she was willing to take that risk, knowing that their love was worth it. It was important for her to create a new, peaceful life away from prejudice and condemnation. Rumors and gossip surrounding their relationship continued to circulate. The locals, who had previously respected Isaac as a priest, now treated him with distrust and contempt. People could not forgive him for breaking his vows, and many of those who had once come to him for advice now turned away. Isaac and Alice understood that it was better for both of them to leave the city, where their past hung over them like a heavy cloud. They decided to start a new life away from everything that reminded them of the past. Isaac, who used to be known as a priest, was now ready to become just a man, a husband and a father. Alice agreed with him, and together they went in search of a new place where they could start from scratch. After much thought and discussion, they moved to another city where no one knew their story. It wasn't easy, but they knew it was the only way to find peace and happiness for their new family. They had to rebuild everything in a new place. Isaac was looking for a job, and Alice was preparing for the birth of a child. Despite the difficulties, they found solace in each other. Their love, which had been subjected to so many trials, now became even stronger. Over time, Isaac found a job related to charity. He began to help the homeless and those who needed support, and this gave him a new sense of the meaning of life. Although he was no longer a priest, his desire to help people did not disappear. He realized that his vocation was not necessarily spiritual service, but service to people in need of care and support. He found joy and satisfaction in this new activity. Alice gave birth to a healthy boy, and their life was filled with new meaning. The birth of a child became for them a symbol of a new life, which they could now enjoy away from condemnation and prejudice. Every day they enjoyed small achievements, made plans for the future, and created a cozy home where they could be happy. Their relationship, despite all the obstacles, has only strengthened. They had gone through so many hardships together that they now seemed indestructible. Every day they became closer to each other, and their love became their support in the most difficult moments. Alice, who had once been afraid of being judged, now felt confident in her choice. She knew that Isaac was her true partner, and together they could overcome any difficulties. Those around them in the new city accepted them for who they were, not knowing their past. This allowed them to start a new chapter of life without the burden of old mistakes and vows. Isaac and Alice were free to be themselves without worrying about anyone judging them. They became a family that, despite the trials, continued to grow and develop. Sometimes Isaac still felt a shadow of doubt, remembering his past life as a priest. He knew that his decision to leave was not an easy one, and sometimes he thought about how his life would have turned out if he had chosen a different path. But every time he saw Alice and their son, he knew he had done the right thing. His love for them was real, and it gave him confidence that their future would be bright. Alice has also changed during this time. She became stronger, wiser. Her faith in Isaac and in their love was strengthened. Despite all the doubts and internal conflicts, she knew that she had made the right choice. She not only found her love, but also built a family that became her real home. Over time, Isaac and Alice stopped worrying about public opinion about them. They realized that their happiness depends only on themselves, and that they have the right to build their lives the way they see fit. The condemnation and prejudice that once seemed insurmountable now became a past for them that no longer had power over them. Isaac and Alice continued to build their new lives, surrounded by each other's love and support. They have become an example to themselves that even in the most difficult situations, you can find happiness if you believe in your love, and are not afraid to go against social norms. Their story, full of pain, fear and sacrifice, eventually led them to a new beginning, to a life filled with meaning and joy.